The valley was quiet, too quiet, not with peace, but with dread. On one side, the armies of Israel stood motionless, their courage drained day by day. On the other, the Philistines watched, smirking, as their champion bellowed his challenge again. He was a colossus clad in bronze, a walking fortress. Goliath. His shadow stretched across the dust like a curse, his voice echoing off the cliffs. Day after day, he mocked them, mocked their fear, their silence, their God. And then a boy stepped forward. He was no warrior, with no armor, no sword, and no shield. Just a sling and a few stones, and a quiet certainty burning behind his eyes. The kind of certainty that either changes the world or ends in death. This is the story of David and Goliath, not of size but of spirit, not of war but of faith. He stood like a mountain carved from war itself. Goliath of Gath, the Philistine champion, towering above the battlefield in bronze that caught the sun like fire. His armor clinked with each step, not like metal, but like chains, shackles forged from those foolish enough to face him. His spear was not merely a weapon, but a tree stripped of bark and tipped with iron. The head alone heavier than what most men could lift. Day after day, he descended into the valley, his voice booming like thunder across the hills of Judah. 40 days he bellowed, morning and evening, mocking Israel's army, daring any man to step forward, to meet him in single combat. But none did. Even Saul, Israel's king, once a warrior of stature himself, shrank beneath the shadow of that colossal figure. And so, the armies stood still, thousands of swords sheathed, thousands of shields raised in fear, but not one heart willing. And then came David, neither soldier nor seasoned hunter, but a boy from Bethlehem, with dust on his sandals and the scent of pasture in his clothes. He was the youngest of 8 sons, sent not to fight, but to deliver food to his brothers, bread, grain, and cheese for the commander. He arrived at the camp as Goliath roared again, his challenge echoing like a curse across the battlefield. The men trembled, but David, he stood still, watching. His gaze didn't flinch, nor did he marvel at the armor or the spear. He saw something else, an insult not to Israel alone, but to the living God he sang of while tending sheep beneath the stars. The shepherd's heart stirred, not with pride, but with fury wrapped in faith. Where others saw an unbeatable warrior, David saw a defiant mortal. And in that moment, the boy began to walk a path no soldier dared to tread. They brought him before Saul, a boy with fire in his eyes, unarmored and unassuming, a shepherd among warriors. The king looked upon him and said, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." But David answered with quiet conviction, recounting the fields of his father's flock, where danger came not in words, but in tooth and claw. Your servant kept his father's sheep, he said, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him and slain him. He spoke not to boast, but to witness, his courage forged not in battle, but in faith. The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he said, He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Saul, hearing the certainty in the youth's voice, relented. He offered his own armor, but David put it off, saying, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And so he took his staff instead, his sling, and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, cradled in a pouch of a shepherd, not a soldier. The boy who stepped into the valley bore no sword, only a quiet defiance, and a trust that ran deeper than fear. The valley of Elah laid still, its silence heavier than iron. On either ridge, armies stood breathless, Israelites to the north, Philistines to the south, watching a lone figure descend between them. David walked not with the burdened gait of a warrior, but with the steady rhythm of one who had known solitude and stars, the hush of sheepfolds, and the quiet voice of God. His sling hung loose at his side, stones cool in hand, the stream's memory still clinging to them. Across the plain, Goliath stirred, a mountain of bronze and scorn. And when he saw the boy, he laughed, a sound that rang like war drums. Am I a dog, he bellowed, that you come to me with staves? He cursed David by his gods, his voice rising above the valley walls. But David did not flinch. He stood firm, eyes unwavering, and called back, not with bravado, but with clarity. You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. The air tensed, as if the earth itself held its breath. This day will the Lord deliver you into my hand, he said, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Goliath stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his armor groaning with each stride. Dust curled around his feet like smoke. David's hand drifted towards his sling, his fingers steady. For a heartbeat, they faced one another in the hush before the storm, giant and shepherd, steel and stone, pride and faith. And then the silence broke. In one fluid motion, the sling began to circle. Once, twice, humming through the air like a whispered psalm. There was no cry, no roar, only the whir of faith in motion. Goliath advanced, raising his spear, its shaft thick as a weaver's beam, his shield-bearer scuttling behind, already forgotten. But before the giant could close the distance, the stone flew, small, unremarkable, and unshaking in its purpose. It struck true, sinking deep into Goliath's forehead with a dull, final sound. The giant halted mid-stride, confusion flickering across his face like a shadow of morality. And then, as if the earth had called him down, he fell. The Philistine champion hit the ground like thunder, his armor clattering in protest, his sword cast aside, silenced. For a breathless moment, time stopped. Then the valley erupted. The Philistines reeled in disbelief. Israel surged forward with a cry that echoed from ridge to ridge, a roar not born of strength, but of awe. David stood over the fallen Titan, breath shallow, the sling still dangling from his hand. He did not gloat, did not shout. Instead, he took the enemy's own sword, heavy, cruel, forged for a hand far larger than his, and with one final motion severed Goliath's head as a symbol not of brutality but of deliverance. Dust curled in the air, settling like a shroud over the battlefield. The boy, once cloaked in obscurity, now stood as a witness to the impossible. In the shadow of the slain, he had not only triumphed, but changed the course of a people. What followed was a rout and reckoning. The Philistines fled, pursued all the way to the plain, their cries trailing behind them like torn banners, all the way to the gates of Ekron. Spears were abandoned, shields discarded, as fear overtook even the fiercest among them. Behind them, the Israelites surged, not as plunderers drunk on victory, but as witnesses still reeling from the weight of what they'd seen. The name of David was carried on the wind that day, not in the triumphant clamor of war drums, but in the hush that follows a miracle. One boy had stood before a mountain of iron and arrogance, and the mountain had fallen. The dust had barely settled when the shouting began, not from the mouths of generals or priests, but from the people. Echoes of David's name rippled through Israel like fire through dry wheat. He returned not on a chariot, nor lifted on shoulders, but walking, dirt still clinging to his feet, blood not his own on his hands. And yet, eyes followed him as if a new sun had risen. Saul watched it too, the crown on his brow suddenly heavier. The women sang in the streets, voices rising like incense. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. It was not a chant, it was a shift, a turn of something unseen. From that moment on, David was no longer just a shepherd, nor merely the boy who faced a giant. He was the one who reminded Israel what faith looked like in motion, unshaken, unpolished, and entirely sincere. But victory, as ever, is a double-edged sword. The songs that lifted David in the streets sowed more than praise. They stirred unrest in the heart of a king. Saul watched the boy he had once welcomed grow into a symbol too bright to ignore. Love turned to wariness, wariness to envy. David, once a shepherd, now walked the fine edge between favor and fear, his rise becoming Saul's shadow. The giant had fallen, but not all enemies wear armor, and not all battles are fought in open fields. The path ahead would twist through palace intrigue, exile, and anointed destiny. But that is a story for another day.